Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is saying loud and clear that the shelling in northern Israel will not be allowed to continue. Netanyahu stressed that Israel knows how to operate on multiple fronts. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
After more than 11 months of cross-border shelling by Hezbollah into northern Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu says the situation cannot continue.
אני קשוב לתושבי הצפון. אני משוחח איתם ועם ראשי רשויות בצפון. אני רואה את המצוקה, אני שומע את הזעקה. המצב הקיים לא יימשך. זה מחייב שינוי של מאזן הכוחות בגבולנו הצפוני. נעשה כל מה שצריך כדי להחזיר את תושבינו בבטחה לבתיהם. אני מחויב לזה, הממשלה מחויבת לזה, ולא נסתפק בפחות מזה.
Netanyahu stressed that Israel knows how to operate on multiple fronts.
כל מי שתוקף אותנו לא יחמוק מנחת זרוענו. החמאס כבר לומד זאת בפעולתנו הנחושה שתביא להשמדתו.
One of the fronts is the Houthi missile fire from Yemen, where the Prime Minister hinted at coming retaliation.
הם כבר היו צריכים לדעת שאנחנו גובים מחיר כבד על כל ניסיון לפגוע בנו. מי שזקוק לתזכורת בעניין זה מוזמן לבקר בנמל חודדה.
More information is emerging on the missile fired at central Israel yesterday by Houthi rebels from Yemen. The missile evaded Israel's advanced detection systems and was not brought down until it was over Israeli airspace, raising questions for air defense. The missile's target is predetermined and cannot change course during flight. Preparations for its launch are fast. Filling the first stage with fuel takes only about 30 minutes instead of several hours for the Shahab missile, so there is less time for early detection. From northern Yemen, the missile requires only 12 to 15 minutes to reach central Israel. The warhead itself weighs about 650 kilo, and the explosives can cause severe damages. The Houthi missiles come from Iran and are nearly identical to the Iranian Qadir missile, which is similar to the earlier Shahab 3. Israel's Arrow missile system was developed to intercept the ballistic missiles, which have a range of about 2,000 kilometers.
The army says that while Hamas has been destroyed as an organized armed force, terror cells continue to emerge as Hamas attempts to reorganize. The IDF took special caution before striking a former school when a Hamas cell was identified in northern Gaza. More on this from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
Day 346 of the war in Gaza, the Air Force struck a Hamas command center embedded in a former school in northern Gaza. The Hamas compound was located in the Razi El Shua school in Bet Hanun. Hamas used the building as a hideout and an operations center for planning missile and rocket attacks against Israel. The IDF said before the strike, steps were taken to mitigate the risk of harming civilians, including the use of precise munitions, aerial surveillance, and additional intelligence. Turning to Jerusalem, where a police officer was stabbed in a terror attack at the old city's Damascus Gate. The officer suffered light injuries after being stabbed in the head and back and was taken to hospital with the knife still lodged in his back. Other police and border police chased the attacker into the old city, where he was eventually shot and neutralized. He was identified as an Israeli Arab from the town of Arara. The Damascus Gate leads to the Muslim quarter of the old city and has been the scene of many terror attacks over the years.
And joining us now with more on the ongoing war is Olga Deut, Vice President of NGO Monitor. Olga, thank you so much for joining us in the studio today.
Thank you for having me.
So we're nearly 1 year into the war, 1 year since the October 7th massacre. How would you say Israeli society is doing today?
Well, it's no easy question. Obviously, I think it's a first off for Israeli society to be in such a long war. And most certainly, as we, paint October the 7th atrocity as the worst since the Holocaust that the Jewish people and obviously Israelis have endured, it took a very high toll on us. I think the absence of sort of a resolution it leaves an emotional vacuum. On one hand, we are all hopes that the war will end soon, but at the same time, without returning the citizens of the north and securing the border, without resolving somehow the existent threat from Hamas, and even the missiles yesterday from Yemen, right, on the center of Israel, everything sort of lingers in the air. And I think everyone is very fearful also that we will not see a resolution until there is the new president in the White House, because everyone understands that U.S. now, as one of the main players here, is very busy at home.
And, you know, Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying that the situation in the north can no longer continue. So there does seem to be some sort of desire to reach some kind of resolution, whatever that may be. I mean, what do you make of this? Do you think that Israel will be able to reclaim its northern border?
Well, I most certainly hope so. The question is, I think, not whether we will be able to reclaim it. The question is whether we will be able to do that diplomatically and through brokering some sort of a regional deal, right? Because it has to involve all proxies of Iran, or will Israel have to go into the war? And on one hand, the Israelis are saying, oh, please, let us not go into more wars and have more casualties, both civilian and soldiers. But at the same time, there is a notion amongst the Israeli people that there is no other way, because if we just broke a deal with Hezbollah, a terrorist organization, a terrorist state, basically, then it's a matter of time when we will see another round of this. So we're somewhere trapped between these two.
Okay. And I want to pivot now to your area of expertise, you know, the international NGOs, the international community. What role have international NGOs played in this role since in the war since October 7th? You know, have they lived up to their mandates? We've obviously seen the International Red Cross failing to deliver medicine to the hostages. What about the rest of the NGOs? Where are they?
Well, it's not only have they failed, but they failed on multiple fronts. As you point, they have completely failed Israeli victims of both October 7th atrocities and everything that has been going on afterwards. How come not only did they not manage to get the medicine to the hostages, but no one has even visited the hostages? How is that even possible? But at the same time, they have failed to prevent further diversion of aid, right, that is being siphoned through their channels to both physically and politically support Hamas. There's too many subcontractors, if you will, that work with the bona fide international human rights and humanitarian organizations that are seen as valid partners on the ground. Not only as valid partners, but the world is looking in their direction to sort of to advise them how to now craft the day after in Gaza in some sort of a peaceful and a constructive manner. And on the other hand, not only are they not providing a liable solution that would eradicate radical, Israel hateful, anti-Semitic, terror-driven agendas, but most of them are through their subcontractors and through abusing humanitarian aid, fueling the campaign against Israel, which is everything from the International Court of Justice in The Hague to International Criminal Court in The Hague, all the way to the arms embargo on Israel, because it is these organizations, oftentimes funded through humanitarian aid funds, that are filing lawsuits against U.S. and other governments to prevent it from delivering Israel arms when we need it the most. So it's a very complex situation, and at the same time, it's a historic opportunity to sort of have them play a completely different role. How do they use this enormous, like billions of dollars, to de-radicalize Gaza and actually help, first and foremost, Palestinians, but then obviously prevent further hate of Israel?
And you mentioned the International Criminal Court of Justice and The Hague, the International Criminal Court with warrants that are now seeking warrants against Prime Minister Netanyahu. We have the International Court of Justice ruling on Israel committing a genocide in Gaza. South Africa has reportedly asked for a delay because they simply don't have the evidence. But will Israel be able, in your opinion, to get a fair trial at this court?
Well, I could try to be diplomatic here and give, one of those answers that I can speak long and not say anything. But I think a simple answer to that is no. When you have a court, either of them, right, the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice, as politicized and political bodies that have allowed to be instrumentalized by, let's just take a look at which states. None of the states influencing these courts is a democratic or liberal state. So when you have these countries dictating the agenda and the rulings and sort of where the wind is blowing, then the hopes of Israel getting a fair trial, should it ever get to that, because at ICC Israel is not cooperating officially with the court, I think that option is completely ruled out. But also the battlefield for Israel is not in the courtroom. This is just an instrument. The battlefield is in the eyes of the public opinion, because both courts are being used to shape, to further sort of alienate Israel from what is seen the free, liberal, democratic community of the countries.
Right. Well, Olga, Deut, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.
And the army has confirmed that 3 Israeli hostages were killed as a byproduct of an Israeli strike in November. More from ILTV's Devo Klein.
The bodies of Sergeant Ron Sherman, Corporal Nick Bezar, and Elia Toledano were retrieved in a tunnel network targeted in an IDF strike on a Hamas brigade commander in the first month of the war. After the bodies were retrieved from Gaza, they were examined to determine the cause of death. At the time, the IDF announced that they were murdered by Hamas gunmen. Now, the indication is that the cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning caused by the bomb blast. On November 10th, the IDF carried out an airstrike near the location where the bodies were later found, targeting Hamas Northern Gaza Brigade commander Ahmed Gandour, who was hiding in a tunnel in Jabalia. Family members are saying it's likely the 3 suffocated by carbon dioxide poisoning inside a tunnel following a strike. The 3 hostages had been held in a tunnel complex where Gandour operated. However, at the time the strike was carried out, the IDF insisted it had no information on hostages being held in that area.
And in a new development, Germany seems to be refusing arms sales to Israel while approving significant sales to Qatar. ILTV's Ariella Lechiani is at the Kiryat in Tel Aviv now with more. Ariella, what can you tell us?
Yes, thank you, Ludar. So Germany has refused an Israeli request for arms sales while they have approved a sale of over 100 million euros of weapons to Qatar. Now, while no decision has been made in refusing arms sales to Israel, the officials involved in the matter have stated that most Israeli requests for arms sales have been very much delayed, and only a fraction of them have been approved since the beginning of the conflict, which gives the idea that some sort of de facto embargo is in place. Now, this comes as we have seen much international pressure to halt arms sales to Israel as the death count in Gaza is rising, and also amid much internal conflict within the German government, between those who support and those who oppose arms sales to Israel. Now, we have seen since the beginning of the war much diplomatic support from Germany towards Israel, specifically in international forums, and we have seen many senior officials show support and empathy for Israel following the Hamas massacre on October 7th. However, if we are looking at numbers, there has been a drastic drop in arms sales. If we're comparing 2023 to 2024, where last year we saw sales amount to over 300 million euros, whereas this year they have dropped on only 14 million euros.
Disappointing. Thank you, Ariella, for that report. And moving on, former President Donald Trump was the target of an assassination attempt at his Florida golf club just weeks after a previous incident. Secret Service agents intervened and the suspect was taken into custody. More from ILTV's editor, Mayan Hoffman.
Republican presidential candidate and former U.S. President Donald Trump was the target of another assassination attempt, this time at his golf club in West Palm Beach, according to the FBI. The previous attempt took place just 9 weeks ago. Palm Beach County Sheriff Rick Bradshaw said that the U.S. Secret Service agents fired at a man later identified as Ryan Ruth, who was pointing an AK-style rifle with a scope while Trump was on the course. Bradshaw added that Ruth had 2 backpacks hanging on a fence and a GoPro camera. He was hiding in shrubbery about 365 to 460 meters away from Trump, who was playing golf nearby. After Secret Service agents shot at Ruth, he dropped the weapon and fled in an SUV. Police eventually caught up with him, and he was taken into custody in a neighboring county. Police, speaking anonymously to the Associated Press, identified the suspect as 60-year-old Ruth. They said Ruth had tried to recruit Afghan soldiers fleeing the Taliban to fight in Ukraine and spent several months there. Ruth's social media shows he voted for Trump in 2016, but later expressed disappointment at the president's behavior and said he would be glad when the president was gone. Ruth also shared COVID-19 conspiracy theories and, according to his now deleted Facebook page, believed Jews had no right to the Holy Land. In December 2023, he shared an ancient map about Jesus' journey and wrote, "I'm unclear what part of Israel the Jews owned based on this historic map. Judea, perhaps? It seems historically all to be Palestinian." Part of the Florida golf course was closed off while Trump played, but several spots along the property's perimeter allow golfers to be seen from the fence, media reports explained. Secret Service agents, along with officers in golf carts and on ATVs, typically secure the area several holes ahead of and behind Trump when he plays.
So I would imagine that the next time he comes to the golf course, there'll probably be a little bit more people around the perimeter. But the Secret Service did exactly what they should have done. They provided exactly what the protection should have been, and their agent did a fantastic job.
In the end, the former president wrote to his fundraising list that he was safe and well and no one was hurt.
And in other news, with anti-Semitism on the rise globally, showing support and educating about Israel and Jews is more important than ever before. Joining me now with more is Daniel Flesch, founder of the Israel Educator, a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and a former senior advisor to Israel's mission at the United Nations. Daniel, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So you've been on speaking tours and you've been educating people, both Jews and non-Jews alike, about Zionism and about Israel since October 7th and even before. What have you found to be behind this rise in anti-Semitism in the West that we're seeing today? I mean, is it simply ignorance? And has this experience at all changed for you since October 7th?
Well, certainly part of it, I'd say, is ignorance. There's a lot to know when it comes to Israel, the history of the country, the history of the Jewish people and the region. But by and large, it's not a reason for why many people on college campuses and in city streets across the country are waving Hamas flags, waving flags of Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and other anti-U.S., anti-Israel terror organizations. So I think it's partly the anti-Semitism, but also these individuals, they have a broader agenda, not just against the Jewish state or the Jewish people, but against Western civilization, and particularly in this country, against the United States. And this has certainly changed since October 7th. We obviously didn't see rallies, both with the intensity and the diversity of them in terms of how widespread they are throughout the country, like that before October. You see flare-ups occasionally when there's operations in Gaza, but by and large, the vitriol that we're seeing today is part of a broader agenda. And Jews are obviously just the first line in their fight against Western civilization. Israel's the first line in the fight in the Middle East, and Jews in America are the first line in the fight against the United States. So it should be very disconcerting to Jews and non-Jews alike, both in the United States, in Europe, across the Western world, the level of anti-Semitism we're seeing, because again, it doesn't start with the Jews, it doesn't end with them.
So the age-old phenomenon that's just taking on a new form today. You know, education, many people say that education is the key to combating anti-Semitism, to combating hate. Is that enough today, given the global climate, given not just, as you said, the anti-Israel sentiment, but this anti-Western sentiment? I mean, what else needs to be done, in your opinion, to combat this?
So education is certainly necessary, but I agree it's not sufficient. This is in part why I created the Israel Educator program to provide educational materials and courses to Jewish and non-Jewish audiences alike, both in person and remotely, because I want to be able to reach a broader audience. But I saw this actually about a decade ago when I was in Washington, D.C., and teaching young professionals the history of Israel, particularly to the Jewish community. And many people didn't know the basics about Israel, when it was created, why, how, its story, etc. And so we need to not only educate our own Jewish communities, but also non-Jews who are realizing the threats that, again, part of our conversation, the threats that these anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, anti-Jewish forces pose to the United States. So education is absolutely important, but education is only supposed to be empowering, meaning you provide the people with the tools and the knowledge about the history, about the context, about what's going on, so they can then harness it and utilize it in a proactive manner. So they need to then go out and engage their members of Congress, engage local school boards, engage others to spread the message, to teach people about the story of Israel, the Jewish people, and again, particularly for this time period, threats to the United States and to the Western world.
And on September 18th, you'll be participating in a nationally televised Israel Appreciation Day event. Can you tell us a little bit about this event and why it was important for you to take part?
Yes, certainly. So Israel Appreciation Day is the first of its kind and the first, as you mentioned, annual event happening. It's an opportunity for people across the political spectrum, across industries, across countries as well, to demonstrate essentially their appreciation for the state of Israel, for everything that it's provided, not only to the Jewish people, but to the Western world, to the world writ large. And so you'll see a lot of bipartisan and really nonpartisan support. You'll see a lot of speakers from across different industries. But this is an opportunity to reclaim again, not only the word Zion and Zionism, which I will be speaking about, but also reclaim the idea that Israel is a net positive for the Western world. It is a great thing for obviously the Jewish people, for the United States, for the world at large. And so this is really an opportunity, again, without different borders of political disagreements or anything of that nature, to come together to reclaim the narrative and the context and the story of Israel and the Jewish people. So I'm very much looking forward to it.
Absolutely, a very important endeavor. Daniel Flesch, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.